In the summer of 2003, deep inside the wire of Guantanamo Bay, the United States military initiated a classified program with a peculiar name, Operation Sandman. According to declassified Department of Justice reports and testimony from the military commissions, the objective was simple: to break the human mind. The target was a specific group of Saudi Arabian detainees who were resisting interrogation. The method was not brute force, but something far more insidious: sleep manipulation. Detainees like Salim Hamdan were subjected to the frequent flyer program. Every hour, on the hour, for 50 consecutive days, they were moved from one cell to another. They were never allowed to enter REM sleep. They were kept in a state of permanent, disoriented twilight, unable to think, unable to resist, and eventually, unable to distinguish reality from nightmare. The goal of Operation Sandman was to put the target to sleep, metaphorically, while keeping them awake physically until their will collapsed. 20 years later, the term Operation Sandman has resurfaced, but this time, the target is not a prisoner in an orange jumpsuit. The target is the United States dollar. For the past 2 years, a specific narrative has been circulating in the dark corners of the financial internet. It posits that a coalition of over 100 nations, led by the BRICS alliance, has signed a secret agreement to execute a synchronized financial strike. The theory suggests that on a specific Sunday night, when U.S. banks are closed and liquidity is thin, these nations will simultaneously dump trillions of dollars in U.S. Treasuries. They call this Operation Sandman. The goal? To induce a gap-down opening on Monday morning, so severe that the U.S. financial system simply never wakes up. Is this just an internet ghost story? A conspiracy theory born from anxiety? Or is it a leaked operational name for a very real geopolitical shift? If you want to understand the history the news won't tell you, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because today, we are opening the archives to find the truth. This is the macro edit. To find the answer, we have to look at the classified cables from 1974. We need to look at the Suez Precedent of 1956, where the U.S. used this exact same weapon to destroy the British Empire. And we need to examine Project mBridge, the technical rail that has just been built to bypass the dollar entirely. The conspiracy theorists think the dollar will die in a single night. The data suggests something far more terrifying. It is being subjected to the original Operation Sandman. It is being slowly, methodically, deprived of oxygen, cell by cell, until the moment it simply stops fighting. To understand how the dollar dies, we must understand how it was resurrected. The date was July 1974. The United States was financially bleeding to death. President Nixon had closed the gold window 3 years prior, defaulting on the world. Inflation was double-digit. The stock market had lost 45% of its value. And thanks to the OPEC oil embargo, the price of energy had quadrupled. The U.S. Treasury was, arguably, insolvent. Enter William Simon. Simon was the newly appointed Treasury Secretary, a former bond trader from Salomon Brothers who knew exactly how leverage worked. In July 1974, Nixon dispatched Simon to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with a directive that was stark in its simplicity: failure is not an option. What happened over those 4 days in Jeddah was kept secret for decades. It wasn't a formal treaty ratified by Congress. It was a mafia-style protection racket disguised as diplomacy. Simon didn't just negotiate a trade deal. He negotiated a lifeline for the American empire. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. King Faisal was fiercely anti-Zionist and furious about U.S. support for Israel. The idea that he would finance the U.S. government was politically toxic. The deal had to be invisible. The United States agreed to buy Saudi oil and, more importantly, provide the House of Saud with absolute military protection and billions in weaponry to secure their throne. In exchange, the Saudis agreed to 2 things. First, they would price all oil sales exclusively in U.S. dollars. Second, and this is the Sandman key, they agreed to take those billions of petrodollars and immediately recycle them back into purchasing U.S. Treasury bonds. But there was a catch. King Faisal demanded total secrecy. He knew that funding the American government would look like a betrayal to the Arab world. So, William Simon created a unique add-on facility at the Federal Reserve. For 40 years, Saudi Arabia's holdings were lumped into a generic oil exporters category in Treasury reports. It was a shadow account, invisible to the public, that allowed Riyadh to fund America's deficit without leaving a paper trail. This was the petrodollar recycling mechanism. It created an artificial, infinite demand for U.S. debt. It allowed the U.S. government to run deficits without consequence, because no matter how many dollars the Fed printed, the world had to hold them to buy oil. For 50 years, this secret handshake governed the world economy. I'm curious, do you think the U.S. government was justified in making this secret deal to save the economy? Or did it set U.S. up for a bigger failure today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In June 2024, the internet exploded with claims that this 50-year agreement had expired on June 9th. Let's be forensic here. There was no single document signed on June 9th, 1974, with a sunset clause. The Joint Commission signed that week was a technicality. However, those dismissing the story are missing the forest for the trees. While the date was a myth, the expiration is real. The Saudis did not renew the spirit of the arrangement. In fact, just days before that viral rumor spread, Saudi Arabia quietly joined Project mBridge. This is a Chinese-led digital currency platform designed explicitly to settle oil trades without the U.S. dollar. The contract didn't expire. It was breached. Critics of the Operation Sandman theory often argue that it's impossible. They say, if China or Saudi Arabia dumps U.S. Treasuries, they destroy the value of their own savings. It's mutually assured destruction. This is the conventional wisdom. It is also historically illiterate. We know that debt weaponization works because the United States used it to destroy the British Empire in 1956. When Britain invaded Egypt to seize the Suez Canal, President Dwight Eisenhower was furious. He wanted the British out, but he didn't send troops. He didn't fire a shot. He picked up the phone to the U.S. Treasury. At the time, Britain was drowning in war debt, much of it held by the United States. The British pound was pegged to the dollar, but the peg was fragile. Eisenhower ordered his Treasury Secretary, George Humphrey, to prepare a massive, coordinated sell-off of British sterling bonds. Simultaneously, he blocked Britain from accessing emergency loans from the IMF. The message to London was clear: withdraw your troops, or we will bankrupt your currency by Monday morning. Britain capitulated. They withdrew in humiliation. The Prime Minister resigned. It was the moment the British Empire officially ceased to be a superpower and became a vassal of the US dollar. Now, invert the map. Today, the United States is the debtor empire. We are the ones with $35 trillion in debt, and the nations holding the leverage are no longer our allies. China, Saudi Arabia, and the BRICS bloc hold trillions in US assets. The Sandman theory is simply the Suez Crisis in reverse. The fear is not that they will sell for profit. The fear is that they will sell for geopolitics, that they are willing to take a 20% loss on their bond portfolio to achieve a 100% victory in ending American hegemony. If China dumps $800 billion in treasuries on a Sunday night, the Federal Reserve can print money to buy them. Yes, but the signal it sends to the world that the U.S. debt market is a closed loop with no real buyers would trigger a run on the dollar that no amount of printing could stop. So, how would this theoretical Sunday night massacre actually work? The global financial week begins on Sunday evening in the United States, when markets open in Asia. At 6 p.m. Eastern, liquidity is at its absolute thinnest. The major U.S. banks are closed. The Fed's trading desk is offline. In the Sandman scenario, participating central banks coordinate a simultaneous sell order. They don't sell gradually. They sell at market. Trillions of dollars of supply hit the Asian markets instantly. In a normal market, for every seller, there is a buyer. But in a coordinated dump, the bid stack evaporates. High-frequency trading algorithms, detecting the massive anomaly, would instantly pull their bids to protect themselves. This creates a no-bid market. The price of the 10-year Treasury bond would freefall. Yields, which move inversely to price, would spike from 4% to 8% to 12% in a matter of hours. By the time the sun rises in New York on Monday, the damage is done. The U.S. stock market would open with a massive gap down, triggering immediate circuit breakers. Trading would halt, but the real devastation would be in the derivatives market. There are over $200 trillion in derivatives tied to interest rates held by major banks like JP Morgan and Citi. These bets rely on interest rates moving slowly. If yields spike overnight, the margin call for the major U.S. banks would exceed the total GDP of the planet. They would be technically insolvent before they even unlock their doors. This is the burn-it-down strategy. It bypasses the slow erosion of inflation and goes for the jugular of the banking system. Is this probable? Currently, no. China still needs the U.S. consumer. A collapse of the dollar would implode the Chinese economy too. But is it possible? Technically, yes. And the infrastructure to survive such an event is being built right now. If you plan to burn down your neighbor's house, you first make sure your own house is fireproof. Central banks around the world are preparing for a post-dollar world through repatriation. For decades, nations stored their gold in London or New York. But since 2022, when the U.S. froze $300 billion of Russian reserves, a chill has gone down the spine of every central banker in the global south. They realized their assets were not safe. Look at Poland. In 2019, they flew 100 tons of gold from London back to Warsaw in a top-secret mission involving elite commando units. Look at India, who repatriated 100 tons from the UK in 2024. Look at Saudi Arabia, conducting a $2.5 trillion mineral exploration program to back its economy with hard assets. This is the golden hedge. They are accumulating the one asset that has no counterparty risk. But gold is heavy. You can't use it to buy oil on a Tuesday afternoon. For that, you need a payment rail. For 50 years, that rail was SWIFT, and SWIFT is controlled by the West. If you want to kill the dollar, you need a way to send money that the U.S. Treasury cannot see, block, or sanction. Enter Project mBridge. mBridge allows central banks to settle payments directly with each other, peer-to-peer, on a blockchain. This is the atomic bomb of finance. Currently, if China wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, the transaction routes through a bank in New York. The U.S. government can see it, and they can stop it. With mBridge, the transaction happens in milliseconds, directly between Beijing and Riyadh. No U.S. dollar, no New York bank, no SWIFT. It creates a financial kill switch for American sanctions. This renders the Sunday Night Massacre almost unnecessary. Why blow up the dollar bond market and risk a war? You can simply make the dollar irrelevant. If 100 nations move their trade to mBridge, the demand for dollars evaporates. The dollars currently held abroad would come flooding back home to the United States, causing hyperinflation domestically. This wouldn't happen because of a sudden, violent dump, but simply because nobody needs them anymore. This is the slow Sandman. It's not a gunshot, it's a suffocation. There is one final, chilling layer to this theory. If the dollar collapses, what happens to your money? This brings US to the intersection of Operation Sandman and the Great Taking. Researchers like David Webb have highlighted obscure changes to the Uniform Commercial Code in the United States. These changes effectively altered the legal status of your stocks and bonds. You are no longer the owner of your Apple stock. You are a security entitlement holder with a contractual claim against your broker. The real owner is a shadowy entity known as Seed & Co., which technically owns the vast majority of all publicly traded stock in America. In the event of a systemic collapse, the kind triggered by an Operation Sandman bond dump, your assets are legally considered collateral for the broker's debts. The theory suggests that the Sandman event is the trigger that declares the major banks insolvent. Once declared insolvent, the Great Taking legal framework activates, allowing the secured creditors, the too-big-to-fail entities, to absorb the collateral of the unsecured creditors. That is you. It is a pincer movement. Foreign powers destroy the currency from the outside, while domestic laws confiscate the remaining wealth from the inside. The term Operation Sandman began as a method to break the will of detainees by denying them sleep. Today, the financial Operation Sandman represents the loss of that power. The U.S. has used the dollar as a weapon, much like it used sleep deprivation. It has sanctioned, frozen, and confiscated the wealth of its adversaries. It has forced the world to stay awake on its schedule, trading in its currency, funding its debt. But the world is tired. The bond dump may not happen this Sunday. It may not happen next Sunday. But the migration has already begun. The gold is moving. The digital rails are being laid. The agreements are being signed. The era of the petrodollar was an anomaly of history. It is ending the same way it began. The only question remaining is not if the dollar will lose its status, but whether the transition will be a managed decline or a Sunday night massacre. If you want to keep abreast of the latest updates, remember to subscribe and share this with one friend who still believes in the dollar. This is the Macro Edit.